Verse 53 says, when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And whenever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fragrance of his garment. And as many as touched it, they were made well. Note what it says in verse number 54. And when they got out of the boat, that's Jesus and his disciples, when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him. The him is Jesus. The people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. Isn't that something? When Jesus showed up, the people responded by bringing all of their sick and all of their lame to him in order that he might heal them. Brothers and sisters, I wonder what would happen if you and I come to a place that we really recognize Jesus for who he is and begin to tell others or begin to bring others to him because of what we know he can do for them. First thing, if we only knew who he was, we would really want everybody else to know him. Wouldn't you agree?
Amen.
I mean, if we really know. Now, if I poll the room today, every one of us would say that we know him. But if we really knew him, God, we would really do all that we can to make absolutely sure that everybody else got to know him. And if we really experienced him for who he was, you would want everybody else to do what? To experience him as well. And so I wanted you to hear the verse when the verse says that when Jesus and his disciples got out of the boat and the people recognized him, they began to run throughout the city and villages and get all of their sick, and bring them to Jesus because they knew that he was capable of healing them. And so here are a couple of questions that bear answering, and that is, one, how did they know he was capable of healing? Anybody? Because they had seen him do it before. Over and over again. Absolutely. They had seen him do it before. They had experienced with him because they had seen him. Some of them had been healed themselves. And because if he can do it for me, certainly he can do it for my loved one. And if he done it for somebody else, he can sure do it for my loved one. They saw him do it over and over again. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that their focus was on what he can do and not on who he was? How often, second question, how often do we miss him because we're so focused on what he can do? How often? How often do you miss him because you're so focused on what you think, perceive, hope, or know he can do? Or at least your focus is on what you want him to do, to the point that you miss it. And I'm going to move on with our lesson ask this question, and that is, how many of you today are missing him? How many of you today are missing him? And you're missing him because your focus is off. Because you are so busy focusing in on the miracle. You're so busy focusing in on what you want until you have not yet come to know him for who he is. I wonder how many. You know, Jesus said this, when we read the scriptures, he said this a couple of times throughout the scriptures when the multitude followed him. He said, y'all are following me only for fish and bread. He said, you're following me only because of what you know I can do or what you hope I will do for you. How many of you are focused in on the fish and the bread until you're missing him? How many of you are focused in on the miracle until you have not yet come to know the miracle worker? Brother Ray.
I'm going to say, you know, even around in heaven, the saints are wondering how long. And they're kind of anxious. The scripture says, when will he finally come back? And so they're wanting a culmination of events, whereas
focusing in on events, focusing in on dates, and they're what? They're missing him. Isn't that something? Thank you. And that's what we do so often, brothers and sisters. We focus in on things. We focus in on what God can do, and we really have not yet come to know him. And so I ask again as we move on, how many of you here today, how many of you that will watch online are missing Christ because you are focused in on what you want from him? How many of you are missing him? I want you to think about that. Because this is Bible study. And I want you to really focus in on the fact that he did not come just to be your Santa Claus. He did not come just to be your miracle worker. He came in order to reveal the Father to us, and thereby causing us to believe, trust him, Jesus, and then become reconciled with the Father. And I'm mighty afraid if we're not careful, Joshua. I'm mighty afraid if we're not careful. There are going to be many of us who attend church week after week, month after month, year after year, and we will never know him. I'm mighty afraid. I'm mighty afraid. Well, prayerfully at the end of the lesson, you would have changed your view. You would have changed your focus. And you would have lifted your view up higher than what it normally is. And what I'm trying to say, Nelda, is that your focus at the end of the lesson prayerfully would not be on what he can do, but on who he is. And your focus, or your reason, or your purpose for worship, for praise, for praying would not be to get your way, but to ask him to what? Be the way. I pray that at the end of our lesson that your focus would change and you would come possibly for the first time to having a personal encounter with the life-giving King. The healings at Gennesaret. Let me ask you, what is your favorite car? What is your favorite car? You raise your hand because Joshua going to give me the mic, and we're going to give the mic because we want people online to hear us. What is your favorite car? The favorite car. Don't give me a thesis, just tell me what's your favorite car.
My favorite car is the one I have and it's paid for. Now,
you know that's a general answer, but let's be honest. Because most of our favorite cars, we can't afford them. But what is your favorite car? I like that answer, Sister Weavers, but what is your favorite car?
My favorite car is a Camaro.
Camaro. Okay, what is your favorite car? Sister Palmer has her hand up, and then Sister Collins has her hand up.
My favorite car is the Toyota Camry.
Toyota Camry. Toyota Camry. Sister Collins and then Charles. Go. Josh moving kind of slow.
My favorite was Toyota Corolla.
Toyota Corolla. Now, you know, y'all think y'all slick. At least Sister Gloria Williams was being honest. My favorite car is the one I got now because it's paid for. And y'all telling me it's Toyota Camry. It's Toyota Corolla because that's what we're driving. And I'm not saying it's not your favorite. I'm not saying it's not your favorite. Okay, go ahead, Charles.
Chevrolet Corvette.
Chevrolet Corvette. Amen. Here's why I asked that question. What if, whatever your favorite car is, what if the owner of the lot of your favorite car invites you to the car lot so that you can pick out the car of your choosing, free of charge? He's going to give it to you as a gift. He invites you to the car lot of your favorite car, and he's going to allow you to pick out one and take with you free of charge. And you get that, Brother Bowles. You get that, and you're so excited, Sister Nicholson, you're so excited about being on the car lot. You just amazed with all of those different colors that they have of your favorite car until you never get around to picking out the car. Because you're so engulfed with the car lot until you never get around to choosing your favorite. Where healing represents all of the cars on the car lot of miracles. But the real issue is we are so focused in on the healing and all the miracles of Jesus until we never get around to receiving the gift, the real gift that he has for us. Because healing and miracles are not the real gift. Healing and miracles are only the wrappings, or it's the sign that leads us to the real gift. How many of you know that the real gift is Jesus? You know, Sister Glover, when you really come to grips with the fact that the real gift is knowing Christ, it's an intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, then it changes your perspective. Because whether or not he heals you on this side won't be your focus. Your focus will be him. Because whether it's on this side or the other side that you receive your healing, at least you will have the gift. And the gift is who? It's Christ. And so if I'm on this side sick, I got his presence. But if I'm on the other side, I'm healed in his presence. Am I making sense? So often we miss the giver because we're so focused in on what? Yeah. The gift. And that's a sad commentary. Now remember, the point of Jesus' healing and miracles were to get the people to listen to his teachings. Now I want you to get that. The point of his teaching, his healing and miracles, was to get the people to listen to his teachings. He wasn't just performing miracles and performing or healing people just for the sake of healing and performing miracles. He was healing the sick. He was performing miracles in order to get the people interested in what he had to say. Specifically, about the kingdom and work of the Son of Man, especially about the kingdom and the work of the Son of Man. And Son of Man, when you read it in Scripture, is a title that Jesus even given himself. But note again, miracles and healings were not performed by Jesus just to entertain the people. Miracles and healings were performed by Jesus in order to get the people interested in what he had to say. Because listen at this, Sister Banks. If somebody comes in your midst and really began to heal the sick and perform miracles, you want to hear what they got to say. No, even today, right now today. If somebody today will walk into our presence and there is somebody that we know is dead, I mean really dead, been to the funeral home dead, because if you ain't dead, once you get to the funeral home, you're going to be dead. And I'm talking about dead. And they performed the miracle of bringing dead folk back to life. Wouldn't you be interested in hearing what they have to say? Yeah, if somebody took you right now to the hospital and there's somebody, there's folk that on life support, the doctors have given up and said there's nothing else to be done, and they touch them and they are healed, they are off of life support, life is regained, and they begin to live a healthy life. Wouldn't you be rather interested in what they have to say? That's why Jesus performed the miracles. And that's why he healed the sick, was to get the people interested in what he had to say, in his teachings, and specifically his teachings about the kingdom and what? And about himself. And so as we look at our lesson from Mark chapter 6, verse 53 through 56, the first thing on your outline says, we should remember that the final statement of verse 6:52, stating the disciples' hearts were hardened. Their hearts were hardened. Although Jesus was performing miracles and healing the sick, in order for the people to become interested in what he had to say, especially his disciples, the text says their hearts were hardened. And brother, the question that bears answering is, what is a hard heart? When you talk about hearts are hardened, what does that look like? What does it mean by their hearts are hardened? Well, here's the answer. The answer is when your mind is so made up about something to the point that not even God can distract you from it, you have a hard heart. You know, most of us have our presuppositions. We have an idea of what we think things ought to be. We have an idea of what we think things ought to look like. We have an idea of what we think things, or how rather we think things ought to go. That's our what? Presuppositions. All of us have them. Nothing wrong with it. But when, Sister Horns, your presupposition is so great, it is bigger than truth, then you are guilty of having a hard heart. Again, a hard heart is when your mind is made up about something to the point that not even God can distract you from it. And there are a whole lot of us sitting here today are guilty of having a hard heart about something. But you and I need to know that when it comes to the things of God, God has said in his word, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. As a matter of fact, he says, angel, that my ways are higher than your ways. He says, as the heavens is from what? From the earth. Because, Sister Wiggins, the very day that his ways become my ways, when he starts thinking on my level, or I can figure him out, he ceased from being God. And I don't know about you, Sister Ray, but I don't want a God. I don't want a God who thinks on my level. No. I don't want a God, Sister Fairman, that I can figure you out. I don't want a God like that, because he will cease from being God. I mean, listen, let me chase a rabbit a minute, because Meech is what I'm really trying to tell you. I don't want a God that I have to pack. I don't want a God that I have to feed. I don't want a God that I have to help think. I want a God who's greater than I. I want a God who can handle me. I want a God who knows tomorrow and today at the same time. And so you need to know that the text says that the disciples of Jesus was guilty of having a hard heart. They were guilty of having, Yolanda, a hard heart, because what they thought, what they perceived about the kingdom was opposite from what Jesus was trying to say. And they held on to their beliefs so tight until they missed what Jesus was saying. They were longing for a political king, and Jesus was trying to give them the kingdom of God. Help me, somebody. I kind of put a footnote here and say that all of us at times are guilty of creating blessings because we have our own idea of what we think it ought to be and how things ought to look. And so all of us are guilty at some point of creating blessings. But when, Tina, you create a blessing, you miss a blessing. And the blessings that you miss is always greater than the one you create. Did y'all get that? And so it makes good sense to do what? To trust the Lord. Number 2, the focus of this short section is the greatness of Jesus' healing power. 53 through 56, the focus here is on the greatness of Jesus' healing power. Number 3, in these verses, there is no mention of Jesus teaching or casting out demons. There's no mention of his teaching and no mention of casting out demons. It was just on healing. But always remember, brother, healing was only a signpost. The healing was to point them to what? The healer. Y'all get it? Number 4, the text indicates that the people were asking for permission to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. Normally, what happened is that as Jesus passed by, you got a crowd of people, you have a multitude of people, and they are asking for permission to touch Jesus' garment, because you just didn't touch the garment of the rabbi. You asked for permission. This is big, because when we get to number 5, look what number 5 says. In the story of the woman with the hemorrhage who sought to touch Jesus without first asking for permission. If you look at Mark chapter 5, verse 25 through 34, you'll get that whole story about the woman who had an infirmity for 12 years. She had a hemorrhage that she couldn't get rid of. She had gone from doctor to doctor. She had spent up all of her savings, if you will, all of her earnings, trying to get healed. And finally, she hears about Jesus who had come to town. And what she heard about him was he was capable of healing the sick. And she is in this crowd with everybody else. They are asking, everybody is asking permission to touch the hem of his garment, except this woman. Instead of asking for permission, she just touched his garment. And so the question that bears answering is why? Why was everybody else asking for permission except her? Why did she touch the hem of Jesus' garment without asking for permission? Anybody? Okay.
Because she had nothing else to lose and much to gain because she had so much God.
Okay, Sister Banks. felt what?
She felt that if she just touched the hem of his garment, she would be made whole.
Okay, yeah. Listen, you great faith. Do I? She already knew him? Well, not necessarily. Listen at this, yo. She was desperate. Remember, somebody says she had none absolute. Remember, she had done spent everything. She exhausted all of her means, and nothing and nobody could help her. At this point, she's desperate. And she heard that he could heal. His reputation preceded him. And so she just touched the hem. You heard that saying about it's better to apologize than to ask for permission. Don't really try that, y'all. But that's the attitude of some people. I'll just apologize for it later, rather than have to ask for permission. But she was desperate. She was desperate. And here's another thing. Her faith was superstitious. Her faith was superstitious. She didn't have faith in the person Jesus. She had faith in that garment. If I could just touch the hem of the garment. So her faith really was what? Superstitious. Just like some of ours. But here's another thing I want you to consider. She was, and somebody said this, she was unclean. She was unclean and shouldn't be touching the rabbi in the first place. Because normally, if an unclean person touched the rabbi, he would become unclean. But in this case, she became clean. Did y'all get that? Normally, if an unclean person touched the rabbi, he would become unclean. But in this case, she became clean. Now here's another thing that you need to know. You need to know that everybody that was touching him was unclean. She wasn't the only one that was unclean. Everybody that was touching him was unclean. Because sin is unclean. It's an unclean thing because you're talking about a holy God. And so everybody that was touching him, they had all kind of sickness and they had all kind of diseases and they were touching his garment. And let me tell you something, because I want you to know that she wasn't the only one. However, she just took a different approach. She took a desperate approach. They asked permission and she just touched. And Jesus said, who touched me? Wow. Everybody else touching. Everybody else touching. And they didn't do anything. They got healed. Everybody else touched him. And he didn't say a word. But when this woman touched him, the hem of his garment, he said, who touched him? And I can imagine Sister Curtin's disciples said, duh, everybody. Because there was a multitude of people. What you mean, who touched? Everybody is touching you. And Jesus said, no, that's a different touch. That's a different touch. Sister Banks' hands up. That was a different touch. You see what?
Two miracles.
Okay.
The first miracle, and I can see that because of the 12 years that she had been hemorrhaging, God had kept her all these many years without her dying. And here we see that just a touch of his garment killed her. So that's why I see two miracles.
Oh, absolutely. Because some of us, what we have been through, the mere fact that it has not taken us out is a miracle in this thing. And so you're talking about, you're absolutely right. Hemorrhaging for 12 years without stop. You're absolutely right. God kept her. Well, since Sister Banks took us there, can I put a footnote here and say that's why when we come to church, that's why when we come to worship, it ought to not take a praise team leader to pump and prime you to give God praise. That's why folk ought to not have to stand before you and act like a cheerleader. Come on, somebody, clap your hands. Somebody say amen. Give God glory. No. The ought to really be said, "Meet y'all calm down." So we go to the next place. Because Tina, listen, based on what you have gone through, based on what God has brought you from, based on what he's delivered you out of, when you come into his presence, you ought to come into his presence with thanksgiving. And with what? With praise. And folk ought to not have to prime and beg you to praise him. All you have to do is what? Think about what he's done. And if you just think about what he's done, Sister Nicholson, that ought to be enough to what? To make you shout. That's why Psalms 107 says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord." And I think the problem is some of us really ain't been redeemed. Because we ain't redeemed, or Tina, if we profess to be redeemed, we think we got redeemed because we've been good. But no. When you really understand the depth that God went to redeem you from the penalty and power and ultimately one day the presence of sin, it ought to cause you to rejoice. And as a matter of fact, Sister Palm, when you get to church, it ought to be what? A carryover. Because you really ought to start worshiping and praising on your way. Oh yeah. You know, the old church used to say it's a carryover. Because they didn't wait to get to the church to start praising. My grandmother would put it like this: I woke up this morning with my mind set on Jesus. Let's get back to our line. Number six. Jesus does not have to imitate the touch to heal, or initiate, Jesus does not have to initiate the touch to heal. Jesus doesn't have to initiate the touch to heal because it's an act of faith. And so she touched him. He didn't say, if you touch me. She heard of his reputation. She believed the report, and she touched the hem. 7. Touching the garment of Jesus is the tangible means of demonstrating faith in Jesus. It's the tangible means of demonstrating faith in Jesus. 8. Those who trust him may reach out to him as he makes himself available to them. Those who trust him may reach out to him as he makes himself available to them. And brothers and sisters, he's making himself available to us every day. People who will be lost for eternity are people who refused him while he was reaching out to them. 9. So far in Mark, the crowd's understanding of Jesus is superficial. The religious leaders are antagonistic. And to the disciples, Jesus is misunderstood. The disciples misunderstood it because, again, their presuppositions was getting in the way. They were looking for a different kind of king and a different kind of kingdom. Why was it so important? Or was it important for the disciples to get it? Was it really important for the disciples to really understand who Jesus was and understand the kingdom that Jesus came representing? Was it really important for the disciples to understand it? If so, why? Hold on, brother, that mic is coming.
It was important because they were convinced it was going to be fishing for the men themselves, and they had to understand everybody that they was going to allow to hear the word of God through them, understand what's the significance Jesus in the kingdom.
Oh, absolutely. It was important for the disciples to understand it because one day they would be the teachers. One day they would be the teachers. And brothers and sisters, that's why it's important for you and I to get the gospel right. We better understand the gospel if we're going to be what? Teachers or preachers of the gospel. Because it's the only thing that saves people. That's what Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, when Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. It is through, Nate, the preaching of the gospel men get saved. And that's why there ought to not be any cutting up and clowning in the pulpit. We ought to be preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, not our gospel, not the gospel of this cultural, but we better be preaching what? The gospel of Jesus Christ. And what is the gospel? The gospel is the good news concerning the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ to save us from the penalty, power, place, and ultimately one day the presence of sin. We better preach the gospel. And so it was important for the disciples to understand it because, as the brother so eloquently said, they one day would be the teachers of that gospel. Number 10. Verse 56 indicates that the sick and desperate were requesting to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. The sick and the desperate were requesting to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. Number 11. The word used for hem likely refers to the tassel of Jesus' robe. And so it was that tassel that was at the bottom because of that robe. Tassel. Number 12. The robes of Jewish men were to have 4 tassels. 4. As per the instructions of Numbers chapter 15, verse 38 through 39, and Deuteronomy 22 and 12. And I admonish you to read those chapters for further clarity and understanding of why that was so important. 13, the tassel was considered the hottest part. Hot. I'm sorry. I'm hot. No, that word is hot. It is holiest part. Holiest part of the garment. Holiest part of the garment. I'm telling y'all about me. I'm hot. Somebody tell Keith and Charles and Dinah put that down. The tassel was considered the holiest part of the garment and symbolized Jesus' dedication and obedience to the Torah. His dedication and obedience to the Torah. Number 14, Jesus clearly allows the sick to touch the part of his garment that also symbolized his ritual purity. His ritual purity. Read Matthew chapter 9, verse 13. When we get further. 15, touching Jesus' tassel does not defile him. On the contrary, it heals others. And we see that in the life of the woman that had the issue of blood for 12 long years. Instead of Jesus becoming defiled or becoming unclean, she became what? Clean. By a mere touch. Touching Jesus' tassel does not defile him. It doesn't make him unclean. It doesn't defile him, On the contrary, it heals others. 16. It is interesting that the term used for healing is not the Greek verb meaning healed, but the verb sozo meaning saved. And so, as I said earlier, Jesus is more interested in your salvation than he is you getting over the flu. He's more interested in your salvation. Because, no, seriously, because sometimes, Sister Jamma, sometimes the Lord will use your infirmities to draw you to him. How many of you ever walked in on the old folk praying? Your grandmother or your parent? Maybe you listened in when you were in worship back in the day, when the deacons was really praying. And Sister Home, when they really was praying back in the day. You know, when that deacon got down on one knee and went to talking about, Lord, I thank you. What he said, the Lord, is, I come before you, head bowed and body bent, with my heart lifted up toward the motherless of this, my head bowed toward the motherless of this earth, and my heart lifted up toward heaven and you. And he goes on to talk about, I thank you that the bed I slept in was my cooling book. And the kiver, he didn't say cover, he said the kiver that I wrapped up in was my wine and sheep. And he said the four walls that I slept between wasn't the four walls of a consecrated grave. About now, Sister Quilla, he done got happy. Yeah, and he goes on to talk about how he was what? Grateful. You know, can I put a footnote here? I never will forget it. For me, it was the late Deacon Johnny Brown. As a boy growing up, I would love to go to church. Church was just in me. I just could not help it. God drew me early. And so I went to church with Donald with my grandmother. If my grandmother was going, I was going. And so I went to mission on Mondays. I went to a prayer and teachers meeting. I went to Bible study. I went to all of that. And I went every Sunday night because we had night service. And Deacon Brown would get down on his knees and Deacon Brown would pray. And Deacon Brown would pray. And one Sunday night, I decided that I was going to pray like Deacon Brown. And I got down on my knees, Joseph, and I prayed just like Deacon Brown. Lord, here I am, coming before you. Knee bent, body bent, head toward the motherless of this earth. And my heart lifted up before heaven and you. I said, I thank you that the bed I slept in wasn't a cooling book. And I thank you that the kiver that I wrapped up in wasn't my wine and sheep. And I thank you that the four walls that I slept between wasn't the four walls of a consecrated grave. Now, each as I was praying what Deacon Brown prayed. And the saints was getting, was urging me on in my prayer. But as soon as I got home, my grandmother said, come here. No, this is just a side note. My grandmother said, come here. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, what is a cooling bowl? This is a true story. She said, what is a wine and sheep? I said, She said, what does it mean that the four walls you slept between were the four walls of a consecrated grave? She said, I bet not ever hear you praying that prayer again. Because it ain't your prayer. And you don't know nothing about it. Of course, now I know. So if you hear me pray that prayer, but folk don't use that no more. Because back then in Meaches, when you died, they didn't take you to the funeral home like we do now in the barn. Because like I said, if you get that now, you're going to be dead. But all I'm saying is, got to make absolutely sure that our prayers are from what our heart, and our prayers are directed to God. And so now when I pray, Sister Colin, I'm not praying for you to applaud me, nor to pat me on my back. My prayers are not even directed to you. My prayers are directed to Him. It's He and I communing with one another. Because, Sister Ray, I now understand what prayer is. I now understand for my own self what prayer is. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to number 17. Meaches, I'd rather pray at my own house in the first place. Because when I get to praying, ain't nobody watching their watch, telling me to hurry up. I get to talk to them as long as I want to talk to them. Look at number 17. The same is true in the story of the hemorrhaging woman, in 5:27 and 28. Remember, I said in number 16, it is interesting that the term used for healing is not the Greek verb meaning healed, but the verb meaning what? Saved. Because Jesus even was more important with that woman's salvation than he was her physical healing. 18, keep in mind that Jesus' disciples are witnesses to the mass healing. They saw him healed repeatedly. They saw him perform miracles after miracles. Every miracle that you see take place in the Bible, the disciples are witnessing it. And it is important that they get it right, but they kept on missing it. They kept missing it. And they really didn't get it until after the resurrection of Jesus. 19. Mark 6:53 through 56 stands in stark contrast to Mark chapter 6, verse 1 through 6, when Jesus is rejected in his own hometown, Nazareth. Read that. And hear what Jesus says about that. Jesus said a prophet is without honor nowhere but in his home. You know, you can go everywhere else and people will believe your report, except people at home. You can go everywhere else and people will believe you've been changed, except people that know you. Look at 20. The commentary, the NB, the commentary offered in 6:5 through 6, Jesus could do no mighty work there at home. And he marveled because of their what? Unbelief. He marveled because of their unbelief. He couldn't do no work there. Oh, greater St. Matthew. Greater St. Matthew. Greater St. Matthew. What a tragedy it would be for him to take inventory of our fellowship and marvel over the fact that there is no belief. What a tragedy that would be. For Christ to take inventory of our congregation, our fellowship, and then marvel because of the unbelief. 21. God can do much with people who are desperate for him. God can do much for people who are desperate for him. Let me ask you a question. Are you desperate? Have you really yet come to the point in your life that you understand that without God, you can do nothing? Without God, you will surely fail. Without God, your life will be like a ship without a sail. Have you yet become desperate? No. Some of us haven't gotten there yet because we still got a backup plan in our back pocket. If this don't work, then I'm going to try this. You still got options. But one day, if you ain't careful, you'll find your back up against the wall with nowhere to go but to look up. But remember this, God can do much with people who are what? Who are desperate. Because when you get desperate, Brother Ray, you going to call on him. Right now, we calling on everybody else. Our family, our friends, our acquaintances, we're calling everybody else. But very few people are calling him. Yes, Sister Banks, hold on. The mic is coming. Hold on, Sister Banks.
Jesus also saw them as lost sheep without a shepherd.
Said Jesus also saw them as lost sheep without a shepherd. That's another lesson. He did. The scriptures does say that. And when you talk about lost sheep without a shepherd, wow, I could deal with that, but we ain't got time. No direction, because sheep doesn't have a sense of direction. Sheep is the dumbest animal there is. And they were sheep without a shepherd, meaning they didn't have anybody to lead them, anybody to protect them, anybody to guide them. Wow. Brother Ray.
In 9/11, when the planes were destroying the buildings and the people were running and afraid, they said the churches were filled up the next few weeks, but then that subsided as time went on.
But they were desperate. And after they discovered, not only that, you remember when we were going from 1999 to 2000? And we were told that there was a glitch and the world was going to come to an end. Everybody was nice to everybody. Everybody was going to church. But as soon as we got through 2000, not 2000, we didn't get to 2001. We just got to 2000 by noonday. People went back business as usual. Yeah. We act differently when we are desperate. Any questions or comments?